Well, you mentioned J.J. Watt. He was granted his release last weekend from the Texans, and now there's some speculation that the Browns are in the mix. In fact, Pro Football Focus thinks the Browns will sign him to roughly, they're guesstimating, 2 years, $25 million. That would seem to be something I would see the Browns doing since they went after Jadeveon Clowney pretty hard a season ago. What are your thoughts on J.J. Watt to the Browns?
I love it. I wrote about it on cleveland.com this morning. I think schematically it's the best fit for J.J. Watt. My colleague Mary Kay Cabot on Tuesday broke down why, for every other reason, it makes sense. He's looking for a contender. He could play in the same division as his two brothers, Derek and TJ, in Pittsburgh, only be about 90 minutes to 2 hours away from them as well. And then on top of all that, as I said, schematically, I think it's the best fit. Teams like Pittsburgh and Green Bay run a 3-4 defense. J.J. Watt would perform fine in a 3-4 defense. I just think his best fit is a 4-3 as a standard, traditional, hand on the grass, three-point stance defensive end. Having Myles Garrett on one side and him on the other would make teams, it'd be impossible to run away from either of them. They both are two of the best run-defending defensive ends this game has ever seen. And then Myles Garrett, aside from Aaron Donald, is the most versatile defensive lineman in pro football, meaning you could put J.J. Watt at defensive tackle and Myles Garrett at the same side defensive end on the same side of the center, let's say on the left side of the center. So you have Garrett taking on a tackle, Watt taking on a guard or center. It would create a lot of issues having that much firepower, an overload essentially on one side of the football without overloading. It's two men instead of bringing three or four, but those two guys can produce the production of three or four players, and you can do that vice versa. You can slide Myles Garrett inside, the younger, perhaps more willing player, and let the wily vet at 32 years old play on the outside. It would give Joe Woods exactly what I think he's trying to build: pressure with four, play coverage on the back end, and it would be reminiscent of his 49ers days when he was the pass game coordinator there, and we all know the success they had with Nick Bosa and company getting off the quarterback and then letting their defensive backs make work. So I think J.J. Watt in Cleveland makes a heck of a lot of sense. I can't wait to see how this domino falls. And if I'm able to break down tape of J.J. Watt all offseason and into the training camp and the season, it'll be a blast.
The interesting thing is when you look at last year, Watt was double-teamed the most in the NFL, more so than any defensive end. Myles Garrett was fourth most. So think about putting the two of them, either separating them or putting them together. There's no way to double team them. You're really running out of bodies.
It's exactly it, Dave. It's a math problem. And I'm a words guy, but the math is pretty simple there, right? You got two guys on one side and double team rates through the roof with J.J. Watt and Myles Garrett. Not only were there double team rates, both I believe 1 and 3 in the league according to ESPN, and sometimes some places have Garrett at 4, some have 2. Point is, the guy was doubled all the time, and Watt was a runaway with the most doubles, regardless of the metric you look at. But what's most impressive, aside from their double team rate, is their win rate when facing double teams. A guy like Zadarius Smith of the Green Bay Packers, who's a heck of a player, had a far lower win rate when doubled compared to J.J. Watt and Myles Garrett. So not only are you getting a guy who, and having two guys in Garrett and Watt who are used to facing double teams, they're used to beating double teams and winning there. So if you can't double them, and even when you do, they're going to beat you, I think the Browns' defensive line quickly would become one of the best in the AFC, if not all of football. And again, it goes back to why I think schematically, Cleveland's the best fit for J.J. Watt. And Mary Kay Cabot already broke down why everything else makes sense for him to join Cleveland as well.
Is there any concern? It's an analytics-driven front office. Analytics typically shies away from signing guys that are 30 years old. Watt's in that age range that you typically shy away from. How much do you think he has left? We've already talked about the double teams in that. He's a guy that has had some injury issues. How healthy is he, and what does he have left, do you think?
It's a great question. And this front office is going to run into a couple analytic questions and conflicts as this offseason wears on. You mentioned J.J. Watt. Paying Nick Chubb is going to be another question. We know what analytics say about paying a running back. But where analytics fall short, and this is no knock to anyone deep in the analytic game, and I think anyone at PFF would agree with you, is you have to also have an eye test that goes with it. And sometimes when you're dealing with future Hall of Fame talent, you can throw the numbers out the window because you're dealing with J.J. Watt and, again, Nick Chubb, two guys that are just exceptions to the rule of the average analytics stat that would tell you that this player's on the wrong side of 30 or this player plays an unimportant position in running back. J.J. Watt's played a complete season the past 2 years. He had troubles 3 and 4 years ago, playing single-digit games, groin injuries, torn pectoral muscles. I get it. The list is long, but I wrote that both at the number that is being reported around 12, 13 million, maybe a little lower with heavy incentive-laced contract, make it a relatively safe bet and also worth the risk. I mean, there's just not a defensive lineman on the market of J.J. Watt's caliber, resume, versatility, and schematic fit available in free agency. It's Watt or the Browns are going to be looking for a lesser guy, a more expensive guy, or playing some inexperienced defensive end from the draft. Maybe they land in the first or second round. So I don't want to say it's Watt or bust, but I have a feeling that the Browns are going to regret missing out on him if he decides to go elsewhere, which is why I don't think the injury history is anything to shy away from. This is football. Guys play injured. Jadeveon Clowney would have taken $17 million from the Browns and played about 8 games. So could have been far worse. And I think Watt, a proven warrior, regardless of something catastrophic, like, Odell Beckham Jr. tore his ACL this year. These things happen. It doesn't mean they're injury prone. I think Watt's got 2 seasons of really good football still in front of him, and being able to play in a sparing and situational role here in Cleveland would do wonders for his career, regenerate him, and I think give him longevity that he wasn't having in Houston because he was playing too many snaps.
Let's put it this way. So we've already talked about how many of the Browns' offensive linemen were on Pro Football Focus's top 101 performances. That element of the Browns figures to be as good, maybe even better, just because they're younger. They'll have a year. I expect Jedrick Wills, now that he's used to playing left tackle, he'll, in theory, get a training camp to hone it. If you add J.J. Watt and Myles Garrett on the same defensive line, do the Browns arguably have the best offensive and defensive lines when you look at line play in the NFL, if they can do that?
It's trending that way, isn't it? I declared the Browns had the best defensive line in football back in November, and that's clearly stood true as Pro Football Focus released that for the first time in their recorded history, that the Browns recorded the best pass blocking and run blocking grade in their database. And then you add everyone you just named to the Browns defensive line, and things get pretty scary. I'm confident that most people watching this viewed the Super Bowl this year, and that was a great reminder that football, despite of all the fancy stuff you can have on the perimeter, is still one up front. You got to be able to protect and push guys in front of you on offense, and you need to be able to create pressure and disrupt gameplay and quarterback play on defense. It starts and ends there. And if the Browns are going to continue to invest in those 2 units, I think it's a great recipe for success. And again, it would be a very scary reality for offensive and defensive coordinators across the AFC.